Our next presenting company is Network Newsware. They will be presented by Jonathan Keim. Mr. Keim.
Thank you so much. So it's a real pleasure to be here. It's always great to collaborate directly with the organizers. We've been working with Emily for a couple of months now. It's great to see you all here. And I'm going to start my recording here. We have quite a few contacts who requested a recording of this session, and I want to make sure to use my audio device here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about IR and the importance of integrating effective content strategies with what you're currently doing. I know many of you are probably thinking right now, what could this young looking person have to share that could actually be worth my time? So let's go ahead and start there. I actually began content marketing in the IR space back when I was 17. That was in 2007, and since then we've put out over 50,000 articles. We've learned a lot. Today we're putting out over 900 social media postings, and we do that every trading day through 40 different brands. As far as IBN, obviously we're here as Network Newswire, and that's one brand out of 40 plus, and I just want to share a couple of slides about IBN so you know where our perspective is coming from. Over the last 14 years, we've worked with over 450 public and pre-IPO companies. Here are as many as I could fit comfortably on the screen, but there are more. One of my favorite stories is the Green Organic Dutchman. Some of you may know them as their symbol, Tea God. We started covering them way back in September of 2017. Which was 8 months before the IPO date. They raised $115 million, so they were the largest IPO to date in Canada, and one of their well-known secrets to success was a solid content marketing strategy prior to the launch. Today, dozens of public companies trust us to put out the right content multiple times a week for them and distribute it to the right people. We're also working directly with NIBA here to raise the visibility of the presenting companies. That was part of our collaboration, and again, we're just very grateful to be able to share with each of you how you can reach even more investors to further your success. As a side note, it's important that the content you produce and put out there for the world to see is actually interesting to those who are shown it, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But I thought this SUV here would be a cool way of showing our different brands, and in the banners in the back you can see plenty more. But we took this SUV all over Europe, and it created a lot of amazing content with drone footage and other things that we did. But I'm here to help each of you learn from what we've accomplished, so let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, I just want to mention that my style is to pack a lot of information in a very short amount of time, so everyone can walk away with valuable information. Be sure to take lots of notes, and feel free to come up to me later to go into in-depth topics. But this session is going to focus on identifying the most effective course of action, defining scope, and setting timelines. So it'll be a great overview packed with lots of great ideas. But before we get into it, I just want to make sure to begin by setting the right mindset. What investors see is so critical, particularly when they're doing their research online. Practically everyone is typing the company's name into Google, checking a few financial sites, really getting information from other people. But first, they have to find you before they begin researching. I would recommend using a dual-pronged strategy for the best results. You always have your own channels where the content's all about you. That's your newsletter, social media postings, press releases, things like that. But you're only reaching that loyal following. You also need to reach the millions of investors who haven't heard your story yet, and that means getting content posted in channels that are not about you. Industry-specific publications is just one of many different examples, and there's a lot of different ways to go about doing this, but we're going to focus on what we found to be most effective. Like I said before, feel free to come by later to our area in the back if you'd like to dive deeper in anything that we go over during this session. I'm always excited to share about what we've learned. So let's start with microsites and sponsored articles. You want to make sure that your content would be truly interesting
to the audiences that you're reaching. It's important that they become active listeners as they learn about your company's story. Just showing them your story isn't enough. And ideally, as you're using these different websites, the websites that accept sponsored content, obviously you want to make sure they have a great reputation, but the articles should look no different than editorial content and truly be educational and insightful. Another way is to have the editorial show up in the news feeds of many other publicly traded companies in your space. And this would be essentially the same thing as coming to an investor conference and getting to speak to your peers' investors in addition to your own, meaning you'd actually go in their room and talk to them after the previous CEO is done giving his presentation, except at a much, much larger scale. And while the bulk of an editorial like this should focus on how you're addressing the problem or opportunity in your market, make sure to have quality content on each of the companies you tag to add additional value to the readers. You want to make sure that your readers are always interested in what you have to say next as future editorials are released. Another way is sponsored research, which we would recommend having performed by FINRA licensed and accredited analysts. It's a great way to get quality research reports to a much larger audience. The example here is from Noble, which is posted on their investor portal Channel Check, where investors can find incredible success story podcasts and other interesting information, as well as valuable details on over 6,000 emerging growth companies. So it's just another way of getting your story out in a very credible way. Retargeting is also really, really important. Once you have an audience that is clicking on your links, there's a couple of different ways to make sure that your content keeps showing in front of them. And essentially what you're doing is you're focusing your efforts on those with verified interest. It'll go a lot further versus those that are only hearing about you for the first time and it may not dig deeper. My favorite form of push notification marketing is by far text marketing. You're seeing 95% open rates within the first 5 minutes. You can compare that to email, social media, browser signals, and other things, and there's just nothing else like it. When you put out a text, it's always good to have a link so people can dive in deeper. The idea is to have a really short piece with some valuable information in it, but you want to always pull people deeper into your story. And it's always best to have a plan. You want to use multiple different strategies together in a way that complement each other. So just as a quick example, you could initiate a program with a ticker tagged campaign to maximize your visibility in front of the right investors. Tagging particular companies is a very targeted way of reaching the investors that you're looking for and would best understand and be interested in your company's story. After that's posted, you could do a featured editorial and additional publisher sites. You obviously want to make sure that they have an audience, so you can use analytics tracking technology and other things to measure results, and then also provide remarketing opportunities. And then after that, you could amplify the reach of that editorial by using syndication through Network Newswire. Number 4 here, we've got retargeting. So once you have the data on who viewed this content, you can make sure to constantly show in front of them through the different retargeting platforms out there. And then as you're building a wider and wider audience, it's important to constantly produce more content, whether you're putting it through many of these same websites or through your own website. It's just important to keep the engagement going, and then always try to find ways to grow your subscription platforms. People don't really use bookmarks anymore. They don't revisit websites the same way as they go to aggregators like Facebook and LinkedIn. So you want to make sure to constantly grow your followings along the way. But let's talk about press releases just a little bit. They're very accurate. You get to approve everything 100%. They're very fast. They go everywhere within about a minute, and the distribution is second to none. But there's a problem. Who are you reaching beyond your loyal following? A lot of companies use public relations to get outside exposure. It's fantastic for extra credibility and recognition. We collaborate with quite a few different public relation companies, but I really wanted to make sure that everybody who hears this has a way of expanding their recognition in the space without spending any additional money or bringing in additional teams. So we're just going to share a couple of tips here on how to get independent coverage. So first, you're going to need to find the right journalists and reporters that would be interested. Once you have found them, you can send them an email. And this email is very, very important. Starting with the subject line, you want to make sure that you spend the bulk of your time on this subject line. Even though it's probably less than 8 words, they're the most important words of the whole thing, because if they don't open up the email, you might as well have never sent it to them. And then once they have opened it up, be sure to personalize it. Start with their name. They don't want to be mass blasted. They're getting hundreds of emails every day. So this will help you stand apart. Having a short paragraph is great, but everything should be very, very concise. Only small paragraphs and bullet points. Anything more than that will get overlooked. And if it looks like too much effort, they might not even continue reading the email, even if you did have bullet points in it. So sharing a few highlights and then having a link to the press release where they can dig in deeper, that's what we found to be the most effective strategy. And then make sure that as they're reading it, they get the idea that you're polite, approachable, grateful, easy to work with, because if they want to do an interview, they don't want to have someone difficult to deal with. They're trying to get as many stories out as possible with quality, and so make sure to make the right impression. I'd also like to mention, many of you are publicly traded, you're already doing press releases, so just include a link to that press release. It'll add a lot more credibility than, say, your website, where you can always delete the post, edit, and do other things. Continuing on here, having a really good press kit or investor's kit is really, really helpful to the whole process. I know you all have websites, but a website is too much of a sandbox environment that people can get lost in. When they're flipping through, it's a linear path. They get the whole story all at once. And it's also a lot more captivating when you have pictures and graphics, so make sure that it's more visual than it is throwing a lot of text in their face. Monitoring for placements is something that many don't think about. Even if you email a journalist and they cover you, odds are they're not going to reach out to you. They don't necessarily want to get your approval and have to rewrite everything, or be told what you'd rather have them focus on. So use something like Meltwater or Google News to constantly look for those that have covered your story. And then when you found them, make sure to stay in touch. This is really, really important. Thank them, then tell them that you'll be sharing their content with your communities via LinkedIn, Facebook, email, newsletter, whatever you have. They want more exposure too. And this will make it a lot more likely for them to cover you in the future. And just to kind of tie everything together, just as these two gears turn each other, journalism and sponsored publication go hand in hand. They can each help the other. Journalists love having great content to draw from. It makes their job a lot easier. It can also help them discover your company on their own. That's their favorite way of finding news stories. Going to their email box is more of a second way of finding something to cover, but they're artists. They like to paint and write about things that intrigue them. They're doing this because they love it. They love covering stories that interest them. Of course, they also know that ultimately they serve their readers, so your story should also be relevant to them and what they expect to see on these different sites. But I just wanted to, put that out there. Sponsored publication can really accelerate how fast things get going. And I guess just to kind of expand on that, here's just a quick example of how a news story got on many, many different places all at once. So, succeeding with a consistent plan. I see that I'm running out of time here, so let me just re-emphasize that having a consistent plan that connects with supporting strategies is how you really succeed. For instance, you could put out a press release a month for article syndications or sponsored placements, ongoing social media postings. Always, keep active with your existing audiences as they grow and grow. Personalized emails to journalists. Push ongoing engagement via subscription platforms like your email newsletter. And then just keep repeating this. But I'm going to wrap it up right there. Questions are always welcome. Feel free to meet me in the back. And thanks again, once again, to the NIBA organizers for having us here.